Hi.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Black Panther Book Club. I am your co-host, Peter. I'm so happy to be here talking about some more Christopher Priest Black Panther, and I'm joined from the other side of the world by my friend, FanGirl. How are you doing tonight, Faria?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. We're in the middle of summer here. Apparently, we get the Black Panther movie one day earlier than some of the rest of the world, so I'm loving it.
Boo! For both summer and also getting Black Panther. It's so cold here. Oh.
I'll never know cold again.
Oh my God. We are enemies now. We're enemies.
Yeah, you know, on one of my videos on my own channel recently, I was talking about like what's your ideal weather, or like what's the weather that makes you really happy, but then would you really want that every single day? Because some people, like members of my family, love hot weather and they're like, oh, I would love to be in the beach with my feet in the toes. I'm like, but year round, like even days that you aren't at the beach, I would not want to live somewhere where it's like 80 plus all the time. I feel like this is sustainable for me. It's like always kind of spring. It's cool spring, warm spring, but it never really leaves the spring range.
Yeah, I think my tolerable range is between 50 and 80. So if it could be bouncing between 50 and 80, I would be okay. But, you know, a couple of days in December, it was like 10 even less than 0. Like, I think 1 hour, it was less than 0 or something. That's not.
Well, then yeah, I need to get you down to Wellington because it's pretty much between like 35 and 78 here full time.
Oh my God. Okay. All right then. Yeah, but welcome to Weather Talk.
Weather Chat with Krisis and FanGirl.
Right.
Where we go over all the world weather trends.
Exactly. No. You know, starting with Wellington, you know, back in Wellington. Like where so it's like, you know, go for it.
We're here tonight to actually talk about some Black Panther issues. We're going to be referencing them in 2 collections. One is this first Christopher Priest collection, and then we went halfway through the second one, because next week we're going to finish the second one. So there's a lot of chat that a lot of these stories may be influencing the movie. We are not giving any spoilers of the movie. Neither of us have seen it beyond having seen the trailer. So you're going to hear us say a few times probably, oh, well, if the movie does this, but it's just because we've seen the trailer and we know who some of the characters are. So no spoilers. Right.
Yeah, it's going to be total conjecture on my part mostly, because, you know, I don't know if you like it. I just like kind of, ooh, maybe this is going to happen. There's a good chance none of this is going to happen. Then people will be like, what was Faria talking about? So yeah, we speak with no authority in this manner.
Well, the first thing I want to ask you is not about a specific issue in this run, although we will page through and talk about the specific issues. But I want to ask you, do you think Black Panther, T'Challa, is capable of being a superhero, whatever that means, at the same time that he is the king? Because that's a huge theme of this run, that he can't seem to really manage both at the same time. Is it possible?
And that's kind of something that I've been thinking about a lot, having finished the Christopher Priest run. I think this is all about him being a king, because certain things about being a superhero is, I mean, it also kind of depends on your definition of superhero, is about like you are always looking after a lot of people, or you are caring for everyone, not just a certain group of people. T'Challa seemed to do everything that is best for Wakanda. He doesn't care for the rest of the world. He doesn't, like, you know, even in, like, we're going to talk about a couple of issues that he actually tanks world economy in order to get to Killmonger. You have to explain to me, because I don't know anything about business, so I don't know what was going on in there, but the only thing I took away from, like, he done something that was even, like, you know, taking money, like, you know, just tanking the entire world economy without any second thought, because he just wanted to save Wakanda. So I don't know whether that's very superheroic thing to do, but more like a king thing to do, if you know what I mean. So it's, and also it kind of, like, you know, brings a point is like, well, it's because is he young and learning, so he's making more mistakes now. So there's that aspect to it as well.
Yeah, I find it really interesting, because the reason I ask is the first issue in this run, issue 13, and the few issues following do have some very satisfying Black Panther as Batman kind of action. He apparently has just been through a run with the Avengers with Kurt Busiek and George Perez, and now he's got to track down Hydro Man, who's actually trying to draw him in, and this is issue 13 here. And he's a really fun fight with Hydro Man in a plane in midair, and with Justice, who's like the only Avenger who's left in the mansion, formerly known as Marvel Boy from the New Warriors. And I loved it. But I also found myself thinking, like, it's parody. Like, Priest is parodying superheroes, and Black Panther himself is kind of making fun of that he's doing these Avenger things as he's doing them. And meanwhile, he's abdicated his throne, and he's made Everett K. Ross, the little twerp from the OOP, or the OCP, he's effectively the king of Wakanda, because Black Panther can't do both. If he's going to be in America, jumping onto planes in midair, like Bane in Dark Knight Rises, then he cannot also be the king.
Right. And the thing is, like, I kind of didn't quite know, like, understood that what was the reasoning behind it. Because, you know, he kind of fought to get the kingdom back from Achebe. And then why did he decide that he wanted to take a break from that and put Everett, like, you know, Ross in throne? Like, do you remember what was the issue there? Why did he do that?
I mean, it was really, it's quite jarring, because you get the sense from the first 12 issues that, like, Priest was maybe driving one way, and you almost have to worry, or wonder at least, if it was kind of like a memo from Marvel that was like, enough of all this statescraft stuff. You've got to get a little bit less mature readers, because I think 13 was the first issue that didn't carry the Marvel Knights mark on it, and Priest hadn't been doing as like adult and sexy as maybe Marvel Knights had been on some other titles, but he had been writing a very for grown-ups kind of comic. And I wonder, and Priest does an amazing kind of commentary track to this run on his website. You can go and read it, and I have.
Yes, that's right. Yeah,
and
I haven't done that.
Oh, it's definitely worth reading it. It definitely learns so much. And so part of me is kind of like, well, I feel like Priest had to do something. And so he makes this left turn where T'Challa leaves Everett back in Wakanda. And it's kind of like his excuse is, well, he's not done tracking down all the people that were trying to depose him yet. But really, from a story perspective, it seems like the king should probably stay in his country.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So one of the ones that I wanted to kind of show is that this kind of this page over here. So this is Monica Lynn. I don't know if it's kind of visible for you. So she was kind of abandoned into the forest because she was kicked out of the plane by Nakia in like previous issue, and she was kind of like just sitting there, and then all of a sudden this cheetah comes and finds her, and then they make eye contact.
I was so confused. Christopher Priest is the king of like putting something so weird in the first issue of the run that by the end of the run you're like, oh yeah, of course. Like it always makes sense, but in the first issue you're like, what is this?
Yeah. So and then then they make just eye contact, and then all of a sudden like then she's like, well, whatever, and then she just goes back to sleep, and then the next panel is like, they're just like they're just lying side by side, a cheetah and her. But the thing is, there was no, I don't know what's the history behind it, because I didn't know that Monica Lean was such a badass lady. So I'm always a sucker for badass ladies. So I was going woohoo. So
I think Priest is, over the course of this run, the badass ladies kind of turn into like a slurry of interchangeable characters, because Monica is like increasingly badass, and then we get this new, what do you think, I guess the last thing to talk about in this issue is, what do you think about this character Queen from Chicago, and how she gets brought into the Dora Milaje because she's of the bloodline, and she takes the place of Nakia, who has defected as a result of the things that happened in the first few arcs of Black Panther.
Right. So she has a further storyline down the road, and you can see that how she was, why she was actually incorporated into Dora Milaje, and it's not as straightforward as this makes it out to be. But I feel like how Everett K. Ross was your avatar for all the readers. I feel like she was kind of put in there so Priest can just spew all the political stuff through her, because she, from minute one, she's been just talking about like politics, talking about like African American culture and, you know, like how they're being treated and things like that. And I think she's been used as that, and also as a kind of juxtapose between African perspective versus an African American perspective, because I feel like there's like
I think that's so huge.
Different thing. Yeah, because it's as you will see throughout the run, like, you know, there's and, you know, Priest never hits you in the head with, like, you know, political commentary. He just kind of leaves it there for you to kind of think about it. And that's one of the aspects, I think, QDJ, Queen Divine Justice, or Queen Justice Divine, you know, she was introduced as that to kind of bring in that aspect of things.
Yeah, you know, I think Priest is ultimately such a clever writer, and he knew for the first arc that he needed Everett K. Ross as a perspective character to make clear how insane this whole Black Panther life is. But then already he realizes that you need like commentary within the commentary to comment on some of the feminist issues, some of the cultural issues, and the idea that Wakanda is a non-colonial country. It never was colonized, and it has its own history that has none of that influence on it. And in order to like say all the things he wants to say about that, both positive and negative, he needs a character that can speak to this American experience, but also this African American experience and this African American female experience. And so I feel like that's where Queen comes from. And, you know, last week Faria was like really kind of poking at these Dora Milaje, like they're just supposed to follow them around and just be gorgeous. And I mean, they're tough women, but their whole induction is a little bit strange. And so I just was reading her thinking, like, it feels like kind of a voice for some of your tongue-in-cheek comments. It feels like she must occasionally say some of the things that you've been thinking about the Dora Milaje.
Oh, right. And then she kind of, that continues to continues to escalate because she kind of, because when she was inducted into the Dora Milaje and all of that, and then, you know, they like, sometimes he will tell us like, oh, beloved, you were only supposed to talk to me. I don't know, in my head.
Yeah, he keeps saying that. You're only supposed to talk to me and in this language. And she's kind of like, F off every time he says it.
Yeah, she's like, no, mister, like Z formation and all of that. So she's kind of like a voice of a lot of those things. And I think, you know, that's like just very similar to Everett K. Ross. Like, she's also an avatar that was created just to voice those aspects of it. Because, because Everett being like a white male couldn't necessarily explore that aspect with him. But one of the things about Dora Milaje, we talked about it, and this is something that, you know, kind of put in here and explored a little bit further in a future story arc, but not to a point, is that what happens to Dora Milaje when he kind of fires them, you know? So you can see this is, as you can see, like Nakia.
It's the same page I'm open to. Yeah.
Right. So she's hanging upside down with a whip mark on her. There's a house burning. Presumably her family's in there. And in a future, in a future story arc, that's kind of explored as well, that apparently if one of the, because they're from different tribes, right? And if he gets if one of the Dora Milaje, like, you know, they defects or like is kicked out of the group, then all the other tribes stop trading with them.
Because they're a representative. It's almost like they're like, there's the official Senate, which we get into a little bit later in this arc, but then they are also representatives of the people. And if one of them is discredited or dishonored or dishonorably discharged, it does reflect back on their people. And the thing that's really, you know, that moment where he kisses Nakia, not meaning to, because Mephisto has put him like under a trance in the first arc, it seems so throwaway. Like, I remember thinking at the time, like what is the big deal? Like, they can just get over it. Nobody else saw, but the physical contact really has meaning. And we see that her life is like spiraling out of control. And I think the reason it's important as a plot point is it's a microcosm of all of the things that are spiraling out of control without him paying his full attention to Wakanda. Like, in a little bit of a way, T'Challa is a villain in these 12 issues because he's not doing what anybody needs him to do. He's like interfering with Avengers stuff. He's interfering with world markets. He's not ruling his country the right way. He kind of can't. Monica's not happy with him. Everett's not happy with him. He kind of can't win. And I think this transformation of Nakia eventually to Malice, which happens at the end of this run, it is kind of there to show us how fallible he is as a character. Like, we can't totally root for him because he's doing a lot of stuff wrong.
Right. And the thing is, like, also at the same time, like, they're actually kids because they're underage.
16, 17 years old.
Right. And their brain has been kind of trained that way. Like, you can see in a later runs, like in the Malice story arc, that how when she was young, she was chosen. They kind of checked her out, and then they sent her off to be this. And that kind of does weird things to your brain. And I don't know whether, I guess, like, Priest kind of left it out there for your, interpretation, and depending on how you want to talk about it. But at the same time, it kind of comes back to the whole debate about, okay, this is their culture. This is what they're doing versus, we are coming in here with a Western perspective and say that, oh, that's wrong, But I think, like, the one way to kind of solve all of this, it would be like if they were adults. If they were adults, they were given this choice to either join the Dora Milaje or, like, join like a tribe something. That would have been a different conversation versus like, oh, they were kids pretty much just yanked out and then from their family and stuff in order to represent their tribe. And then they're punished horribly if they're dishonorably discharged. So yeah, I mean, I wasn't quite sure that this wasn't discussed more in details. So I don't know, like, how they're going to portray this in the movie, because apparently they really updated that and modernized it. And I think that's kind of one of the, you can also say that this is also a failing of T'Challa to kind of hold on to this archaic tribal culture and not modernizing himself.
Absolutely. I think that's a fantastic point. So there's something in the chat I want to get to, but I want to talk about one other thing first. So I'm going to skip past issue 14, which just kind of resolves the arc in 13, and skip to this issue with the Hulk. Now, this was not one of the better issues of the run for me, but I also feel like it's Priest setting the stage here for a lot of different things. And one of the things is that he wanted to do something like a little sillier and more lighthearted, which this run was at the beginning in the first few issues. And it's gotten like very, very serious and political. And so he has this run of them having a random fight with the Hulk, which we don't find out until several issues later, actually, is like much later in the timeline of the story. But then the other thing that's happening is you have Everett K. Ross dressed up as the Black Panther in Wakanda. There he is. And he's being made to go on the ceremonial hunt, which maybe was originally supposed to kill him. But he's supposed to kill this elephant. And he's like totally not into it. And he's like calling his boss on the phone. He's calling T'Challa on the phone, being like, they can't make me do this. I'm going to get trampled by this elephant. And it kind of immediately took me back to the first few issues with Mephisto. Like, Priest could almost tell that things were getting a little too serious, and he pulled it back a little bit in this issue, and also like had a guest star, and he's very calculating.
Right. And the thing is, like, I feel like he's also like, that's one of the reasons I was kind of trying to figure out that have there been some kind of mandate from the editors or something that kept on coming on him, because you mentioned that there's like there is a commentary to go with each of the issues, and I am now really interested in looking at that, because I feel like it was super funny when it first started, then it kind of taped off a little bit, and I was thinking that, oh, okay, then he's finding his balance, then it becomes super silly fun again. And I wasn't quite sure that it's just why it was like, if it's somehow connected to the Hulk main series that was going on at the time. So yeah, but to me it felt like very much like what you said. I wasn't quite into a couple of issues on this, and in this order.
But something I think this issue does do a good job of establishing, and it goes to a question here. One of our viewers asked, does Black Panther get a sidekick? Does he ever have like a partner in crime? And part of what really strikes me about this run is, even though T'Challa himself really often stands alone, he's barely in the book at points, because it's a book about such a big extended cast, none of whom really even existed before this run. But all of a sudden, like, you have Everett K. Ross and what is his boss, Nikki? And then you have the two, Nakia and I can't say the other Dora Milaje's,
Okeo. Yeah, let's butcher some African names. Why not?
Right. And then at least they told us in the book with a footnote how to say Dora Milaje. I say everything wrong. I can't even say Kurt Biziak. Sometimes just Busek. I can't even say his name. Then we have, his mother. We have Monica. I mean, there's this huge cast. It's almost all women except for Everett K. Ross. Right. But nobody is like his adventuring sidekick, but that's because he's not really adventuring. That first little burst of action we get with him and Justice in the first 2 issues is really the only part where he's like a traditional superhero, and then a little bit, in a few minutes, we'll talk about him in Moon Knight. But there's never a chance for him to really have a partner in adventure. And yet there's this huge cast.
Right. And I don't think... I don't know, like, I don't see him as someone who need a partner. Like, he's more like more like Daredevil, whereas like Daredevil with a partner feels weird, so it's kind of like, it's similar to that. Like, Daredevil has Foggy Nelson, and over here he has Everett K. Ross, kind of like a similar dynamic.
Right, because he's ultimately not somebody who's going to train someone. Like, unless there was, the only way you could really do that is if there was like a prince that was going to take over Wakanda or being the Black Panther or whatever, which I'm sure either someone has done or somebody will do. But he's much more like a hero like Daredevil who might have a protege. And especially because he has all of this political aspect to him, he tends to need somebody who's a little less serious. Like, having read some of the Hudlin run with Storm at his side, who Storm can be a serious character, but she's a character who's become very assimilated into modern American culture over her time with the X-Men. And Storm really takes the air out of him a lot. She really is the kind of character who's always poking him and being like, you are taking this a little bit too seriously, even though she understands statecraft and being a representative of her people. So I think Black Panther's supporting cast tend to like assemble around him so that they can feel emotions for him, because he's usually so focused on being a king.
Right. And it's mostly to kind of tell you what he's thinking, because you have no idea what he's doing. So that Everett K. Ross kind of being there and kind of telling you what he's doing and stuff like that. And speaking of Storm, she does appear in this run as well. But
she's in like the last panel of the issue after. I should have included issue 25 in today's reading. Having read it now, I realized it was the end rather than the start, and she's in the last panel there. I'm like, Storm!
Yeah, and then she has like some very interesting conversation with him that's kind of very similar to what you were telling, that, what Hudlin's runs alike. So I think that she's always that moral compass for T'Challa to come like every couple of days, like a couple of times around and say like, hey, you need to be better than this, to kind of like that. One of the things though, in we kind of skipped over it, but Avenger, his name was Justice. That's the silliest name in the world, but
I forget his real name, but yeah, his name is Justice.
Anyway, but over here, Ross says that, oh, he fell into a vat of cream, and
which is a recurring joke.
Right,
because Ross, whenever Ross is doing his official report and he doesn't know the origin of somebody's powers, he's like, he was a young boy and he fell into a vat of cream of wheat, and then it keeps coming up in his report, and you get a sense of like, even though he talks a big game, that how like bad at his job he is. He's just an assistant who is a lawyer. He's not a secret agent. He's not Coulson. And I think it kills me how bad it is at his job.
Yeah, and then he says that, and the thing is, one of the cool thing about is like, even though he's in Avengers and he's like a lower, like D-list Avengers, and Justice has no idea who T'Challa is. Like, he shows up and he's like, oh, are you Falcon? Like, he pretty much just spews out all the couple of black superhero names that he knows, and it's kind of like a similar reaction to a comic book nerd you would see, who is not necessarily how to say it, just kind of like a very mainstream comic book reader, let's just say. He pretty much had the same. And the thing is about T'Challa was very nice to him, and I was kind of like kind of guiding him and was telling him that, he's like, oh, I never actually drove or piloted the Quinjet or whatever. And he's like, well, it's going to be a good lesson now, wouldn't it? He was kind of guiding him on that. But the thing is, knowing further about him and how he's like that, I can't kind of suspect that, was he just being a little bit condescending? And then,
of course.
Just kind of Like, like, I mean, no, T'Challa himself was being condescending.
Yeah.
Was like, ugh, whatever. Like, you know, but at that time, I was like, oh, he's being so nice.
Well, I think, you know, that's actually really interesting. So, you know, he later in this run we get footnoted, you know, he's been in the Avengers since Avengers 52 or 53 back in the 60s, and Hank Pym and Janet were two of the first Avengers to welcome him to the team, and he was invited by Captain America. And even though he's at odds with the Avengers at points in this run, you get this sense that he code shifts, right? Are you aware of the code shifting?
No.
Okay, so code shifting is this idea, it's linguistic in nature, but it can apply to any situation, that anybody who comes up in two different situations, whether that's two different languages or two different cultures, that they are able to code shift between them so that they are kind of using the right language and the right mode of communication for each culture based on where they are. I personally, even though I'm just this you know, plain old white American, I code shift really heavily when I'm in South Philadelphia and back in the States, because everybody's like so Italian there and they're so brusque. I speak differently. My language, I use different vowels. I speak in a different place in my voice. I just code shift. I don't even really think about it. And this is a big topic in African American culture because, you know, and increasingly there's this divide between needing to be, you know, very professional and then also a kind of a undercurrent of a different kind of communication that you might have with your friends and family, which is not that it's bad or vulgar, but if you were to speak like that to somebody professionally, they would then judge you. And I think that Priest is playing this idea of like, there's this haughty Wakandan royalty version of Black Panther, but he immediately does code shift when he's around Justice, because he's like, well, here's one of these young Avengers. I'm a symbol to him. This is not the same as arguing with Cap, who's my peer. And
Right.
He immediately goes into like coach mode. And I don't know how consciously he thought about it, you know, but it's clear that he does it. And I think you see that in a few situations here, that he like very easily shifts from king mode to Avengers mode, because I think T'Challa thinks he can be the king and a superhero. And this whole run to me is about telling him he actually can't. He's wrong.
That's a very good point, that code shifting, huh? Okay, I'm going to use that from now on. You know, people are like, why are you talking like that? I'm code shifting, y'all.
Oh, it's a thing. There's tons of academic research about it. And
Right. Okay, yeah, I mean, you know, that's something, yeah. Okay, all right, interesting. Yeah, but that's very true then, because, you know, he does that a lot, because especially whenever he's an Avenger, he kind of changes his modes a little bit. And there is another kind of, I thought it was a very sweet moment that comes up later on, and we can talk about it a little bit too.
So just to give the official definition, in linguistics, code switching occurs when a speaker alternates between two or more languages or language varieties in the context of single conversation. Multilingual speakers of more than one language sometimes use elements of multiple language when conversing each other. But as with many concepts, it's been kind of, when it got exposed to the media, it got broadened from just being a linguistic concept to also being a cultural concept as well. I want to hold up a page. Oh, please go ahead.
No, I'm saying that that's exactly what me and my sister, like my sister and I, we do all the time, because we speak like two language, and when we're talking to each other, sometimes we will switch between that to kind of emphasis on, oh, like, you know, mom said this, you know, our mom doesn't speak to us in English, so to kind of like to put the emphasis on it and things like that. But okay, I wasn't aware. I learned something today. Hey, so Peter.
Here's an interesting thing that goes back to your discussion point. Black Panther, T'Challa, is allowed to code shift both linguistically and culturally. The Dora Milaje are not allowed to code shift by the definition of their role. They have to speak a certain language, and they have to speak with a certain formality. It's not just that they can only speak to Black Panther, but they're restricted from having any kind of cultural liaison other than the most straightforward Wakandan one. And this is why Queen, as an American, to jump around a little bit in this run, has so much like dissonance with it. Not because it's restrictive, not because it's anti-feminist, but because one of the rights that they lose as the Dora Milaje is they lose the right to code shift.
Right. Interesting. Ooh, okay. Now I hate this concept even more. They even took the language away. Yikes.
Right? But like, what if, you know, you have certain settings where your mom is like, stop speaking English because I don't understand what you two are talking about. Has that ever happened?
Well, I mean, the thing is, like, we're kind of respectful of that. I mean, it's kind of like feels weird to talk about talking a different language in front of some. And my mom, since then, she has learned English. Like, it's not as frequent as, like, she wouldn't understand what we're talking about because it's not that fast, but she understands the basic things. And, and the thing is, out of respect, sometimes you wouldn't do that because, my mom will think we are conspiring against her.
Right.
But
that's your choice. You have the agency to decide.
Right. Exactly. But the thing is, like, and given that we're jumping around, but there's a parallel to that. And, so the way he talks to Justice is not the same way he actually talks to Triathlete. Like, Triathlete is another black D-list Avenger, and he shows up into Wakanda, and at that point, well, it's part of the spoiler, but Killmonger already beat him, and he is no longer Black Panther. He's just King T'Challa, which I wasn't sure that you can do that. I thought those goes hand in hand, but apparently not. And then, so he shows up somehow in the technical jungle or
techno jungle, right? Which is from his first appearance in Fantastic Four that we talked about last time.
Right. So he shows up, and then they have a very quiet moment that's away from all the fighting that's happening in the background. And then they talk about tokenism. And that to me was very kind of a huge contrast between how he deals with Justice, who is like a white D-list Avenger, versus triathlete or triathlon.
Right,
anyway, like
dumbest hero name that has ever been thought up.
Oh my goodness. Triathlon, who is a black D-lister, because he actually talks about, like, Triathlon talks about that he is not sure why he's an Avenger, and he's kind of scared that he's there as a token, and kind of speaks about his thing, and and then T'Challa pretty much tells him, well, you need to figure that out, that why you were an Avenger and kind of what you can bring to it. And something that's very close to me, though, because I'm a woman of color who's an engineer, and it's no joke that my first job, they had a mandate to hire someone like me. So it's something that I found out later, and as a first job and out of school, knowing that does thing to you.
Yes.
It does kind of messes you up. So when I kind of read that, I was actually, well, now I am like, I'm senior. I have like, much more experience. So now I know that why you're getting all of this, and so looking at, like, reading that, it kind of felt very close to me. And I was like, oh, it's kind of nice that was discussed. Someone discussed it in comics.
Well, and that hits close to home in my family, because my wife is a woman of color and also is a woman in tech. She's a programmer, and kind of like fought her way up from not being a programmer to being a programmer, and encountered some of those same things. And I think Black Panther's comment to Triathlon is, gosh, here we thought this was going to be a short episode, but I feel like there's so much we could be talking about.
I know.
His comment to Triathlon is kind of like, you get to decide what tokenism is going to mean to you. Like, maybe they invited you to the squad because you're a black superhero. Fine. But are you a token or are you an Avenger? And Black Panther comes from tons of privilege to say that, because even if his inclusion was tokenism in the 60s, he was the king of a country. It was almost like he was like almost culturally had to be included as an Avenger. So, it's like when somebody who's already a senior, it's like if you were talking to a young woman and who had just started in a tech job, and you were saying to her, well, you get to decide what tokenism means to you. And she's like, well, that's nice, Faria. You're a senior engineer now. So there's definitely a power disparity between T'Challa saying that to Triathlon.
Right. But what really kind of made I was like, whoa, like this, like, as we kind of discussed, like these 12 issues was kind of like an up and down in terms of quality. And it was kind of like going all over the place, because Deadpool shows up before. I was like, okay, Deadpool and Black Panther. I thought that those two people would be in the same issues, but okay, anyway. And so there's like all these kind of crazy things that were going on, and you have no idea. Then kind of, it just pretty much like stop, and then silent, all the music fades away, you have this moment, and then back to punching again. So it was kind of like, I don't know, like I even though I forgot a lot of the things because it's been already like 4 days since I read the last issue.
I read it last night and I forgot some of these things.
Oh, right. So see, but the thing is, like, it stayed with me, and I was like, oh, okay. And I'm glad that that was discussed, and especially like given that Black Panther, like you said, like he's a senior, like he has a more established, presence, and he talks to like a little one, like it's kind of like, for example, if this was happening with like oh my god, with Falcon or Luke Cage, it wouldn't have the same depth. I think, like if T'Challa was talking like that to Luke Cage, like that wouldn't have the same depth versus
transition into. So let me just note a couple of agenda things that I know we're going to talk about and we haven't gotten there yet. We're going to talk about Killmonger. I want to talk a little bit about how the great futurist that Priest is and how he kind of predicts some things that are going to happen in the future of Marvel in some of the things here. And then we're going to talk about the stock market stuff, and then we're going to talk about Moon Knight and the Land of the Dead. But let's talk about Falcon and Luke Cage for a second. So Panther gets sucked into this kind of rather inconsequential showdown in New York in the scope of the run.
Right.
All you really need to understand is there are still people trying to kill him while things are going down in Wakanda. Right. And first, Falcon shows up and helps him a little bit, and then Luke Cage and Iron Fist show up to help him a little bit, and then Dr. Voodoo shows up to help him a little bit, and plus all these great like late 70s villains like Cottonmouth, who you would maybe know from the Luke Cage TV show, who they're fighting against. And I realized like a few minutes into this, and then continuing through the Moon Knight material a few issues from now, that a lot of this run is like Priest's love letter to 70s Marvel. And like 70s Marvel is when Marvel really started actually including Black heroes wholesale, not just Black Panther, but it was still largely being created all by white creators, except for, I want to say the name of the guy who illustrated Panther is maybe Billy Graham. No, I'm making that up, but what is his darn name? He was a Black creator and one of the few who had touched these heroes. And I feel like, oh yeah, there's Billy Graham. Look at me. So, and I feel like this is Priest like briefly having a little bit of fun as a Black man writing Marvel and being like, and also being a fan of Marvel, to say like, let me collect all of these 70s characters who always spoke in this like hood way. And he makes fun in the captions how like Falcon had previously been a pimp, which has been retconned since. But then he turns into a social worker because like how much of a Black plot could you give him in the 70s? And so he's saying, I'm just gonna read some of the narration here in this issue. Carl Lucas was wrongly convicted of murder and sent to prison where he fell into a vat of cream of wheat and became Luke Cage the Power Man. Snap Wilson was a racketeer, pronounced pimp, turned social worker. We'll pretend not to know a felony record would disqualify him from that job. Snap flew to Rio, I guess, to buy more rackets, and fell into a vat of cream of wheat. And anyway, the client made him a set of jet-tip glider wings, and he became the Falcon. And so it's like Priest really just totally poking fun at all of these, you know, relatable Black guy tropes from the 70s written by white men. In Everett's narration too, like poking fun of them in the official white, you know, dorky voice of his book, while T'Challa is having this very like, hey friends kind of conversation with all of these heroes.
Right. And it's kind of like, you know, one of those things like, you know, that's why to touch out, like, you know, people are like, oh yeah, like, you know, why everyone's talking about Black Panther, because there's all these Black superhero movies that was before. That's okay, that's true, but look at what the origin stories were, that what that was that. And then the thing is, like, most of the time they were like criminals or like, you know, just pretty much the same way, like, you know, that they come from that kind of background, versus there's like, for the first time, there's an African American, you know, there's an African, yeah, not American. You know, this is a Black superhero who doesn't have any criminal record or anything, and he's a king. He's a king, and that's where it's different, and that's why it's like we're all very excited to go see this movie on Thursday.
Yeah,
some of us at least.
So let's we're pretty much wrapping up this first book here. So now that we're at the end of the story there and moving into the second one, let's talk about Eric Killmonger, who we know him to be in the movie. He's Michael K. Was that his
Jordan?
B. Jordan.
Michael B. B.
B.
Jordan.
Jordan. Michael B. Jordan's,
Yes.
who was in Creed and Fantastic Four and other movies. It's
The
his character,
Wire.
and the Wire. And the likeness, I think, is strong. He's not quite as like massively jacked as Killmonger in this comic book, but he's jacked, and he also has the hair, the little like whip of short dreadlock. I don't know, maybe they're twists. I don't know from the comic book. So we know he's in the movie, and what we get of him in the book is that he's died multiple times. He always finds a way to come back, and he's somebody who doesn't have a legitimate claim on the throne of Wakanda, but he's like a political agitator who has kind of created his own city-state where he has a lot of power, and people trust him because he is way more looking out for the interests of his people in the city-state than perhaps Black Panther is looking out for all Wakandans at this point. And so he has a little bit of a legitimate demand to say, like, maybe I should be in charge of this all. But then he's also doing something really villainous where he's like, if I take out Black Panther, I can like destabilize the economy, and we'll get there. So I don't know. What did you think of Killmonger? Did you like him as a villain? Did you find him to be a villain, or was it more of a shade of gray for you?
So he's definitely, to be honest, it's more shade of gray than anything, because, you know, at one point he actually does and joins the Avenger, and we're like, oh, that's not too bad, like, you know. And I think so this is me being very being very racist. Yeah, so I'm gonna, like, this is his first appearance, I think, in the comic book. Like, if you see this guy, would you think that he's this engineer, or like he has education and he's being educated in the US, and he has all this like military career and everything? You don't think that. And so the thing is, like, you would think that, oh, this is like he's like a super villain that's coming to destroy everyone. But he's actually, turns out that he has more shades than that. Like, he truly believes that Wakanda needs to be the superpower, or they need to be better than what T'Challa wants to keep them. Like, T'Challa wants to do, like, you know, he follows the whole isolation, like, you know, he wants to just remain Wakanda to remain hidden from everything, but Killmonger's side of thing is like, no, we need to be more out there, and we need to kind of establish our dominance as a superpower.
Yeah, and sorry, I was having an audio problem that I think was on my side there. Yes. Oh yeah, you were being buzzy. Folks in the chat, tell me if I am too. Like, you kind of had like a I don't know if maybe you can like replug in your headphones or something just while I'm speaking now. It didn't seem like it was like a physical thing. It was more like an electronic buzz. But to pick up on
Can
that,
you hear me now?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Oh, okay. All right, then.
I think to pick up on your point that Priest continues to play with that original Jack Kirby Stan Lee conception, where he presented Wakanda as these kind of like technical savages. But at the time, I don't think Lee and Kirby had the vocabulary to really show how advanced Wakanda was. But Priest is able to execute that. So yeah, he totally baits and switches us. He starts out with this guy that we think is going to be like another Achibe, but with muscles. And then it turns out that he's this like successful businessman, inventor, whatever, who's on the same level of Black Panther. The Priest is, especially because he has Everett K. Ross to kind of like unbalance us in the narrative, he really is a lot of times kind of putting one over on the reader. And he does that to this day. His current Justice League arc is amazing. But he's constantly tricking you into believing something, and then it's the other thing. He's very manipulative.
Right.
I love it.
And the thing is, like, some of the aspect of Killmonger is actually carried on into the movie as well, because in the movie he was educated in America, very much like here, and so he's kind of bringing the Western perspective into Wakanda, and kind of comes into a time when T'Chaka is dead in Civil War, and there's a power vacuum, and he comes in as a other side to show another different side that we need to be different. We can't just keep on being in this, like, you know, put another next name here, Ticha, next, you know, this family's monarchy. Like, he kind of questions the legitimacy of the monarchy and kind of drives the narrative. We don't know that. We haven't seen the movie, but I'm assuming. Yeah. and he, you know, he kind of does a similar thing here too. But I think, like, he just wanted to be Black Panther. I think that's his major motivation, that he wanted to become Black Panther to kind of, you know, do something different in Wakanda versus to be actual king. I don't think that was necessarily his motivation in this run, at least.
Yeah, and so we find out he was kind of behind all the stuff that was happening in the previous round. Now we're in Christopher Priest Volume 2 on issue 18 here. And Killmonger starts like an all-points attack on everything that is T'Challa. He is making aggressive moves in the stock market that's going to like undercut the value of the Wakandan currency. He invades the, what is it, like the Citadel of the Dead, and stages a fight there because he wants to take, that's kind of like the seat of the Panther powers.
Right.
And he's also effectively trying to goad Black Panther into this duel that will allow him to take on the mantle of Black Panther, but not king, because technically Everett Ross is the sovereign right now. If he wasn't, then maybe it would let him do more than just be Black Panther, but at the very least, he's going to become Black Panther. And we've definitely seen this fight in the trailers of the movies, I think. Yes. Clearly we're going to see some version of this in the movie.
Right, and it's in the water. It's in water body as well. In the
it's really right out of this.
Right, it's absolutely out of this. Do you understand any of the things they talk about in terms of stock price and stock market?
Okay, so it's I don't know if it's worth deep discussion, but the basic rationale is that he's talking to Monica, who is Black Panther's former fiance, who is from America, that has now kind of semi been captured, semi is just hanging out with Killmonger. And he's making the point that like it's always better to save your money than to spend your money in terms of economic power, because as soon as you spend your money, that money gets put into a corporation, which gets, then becomes part of their value, but the corporation is trading above their value because they like IPO'd and they're on the stock market, and that's really not paper value and money. And that ultimately a corporation that has a lot of influence in value then has influence over governments. And so it's kind of like save your quarter, kid, because we see this kid with his imaginary quarter, because your quarter has more power as a quarter than it does as a thing, as this book that you bought. Which lets Marvel Comics, which is owned by Disney, legislate and like fight with lawmakers about like how much they should be able to pay their employees minimum wage. So Killmonger has a number of private companies that he's established, and he's basically looking to like leverage those companies to like buy out a lot of Wakandan businesses and gain power. And so T'Challa, who's clever as always, undercuts this by nationalizing all business in Wakanda, and dissolving his Senate. So basically any business that was trading as a business in Wakanda, he basically says the government is now going to be in control of all of these businesses, which is like something you might hear when a country is like heading into communism. And so all of the stock prices drop because effectively all of these companies are being told that you don't have any inherent value anymore. Your value is that the Wakandan state is going to control your production. And so in all the world stock markets, all the stock drops. Even though this seems like a terrible decision for T'Challa to make, it effectively like cuts off Killmonger's plan of the legs, because there's no valuable corporations for him to leverage anymore, because T'Challa has nationalized them all. So not only has T'Challa removed Everett K. Ross from the equation so that Killmonger can't become king, now he's removed all of the money from the situation, so Killmonger can't leverage him politically, and all that's left is fighting over being Black Panther. That's the only thing that's really on the table, and Killmonger's like, fine, I'll take it, because I want something.
Now he's a genius. Oh my God. I wish I understood all of it, because and the thing is like, so my dad is a stockbroker, and if he heard me talk like this, he would be like, just die of shame and disown me. Like, it's like, you didn't understand anything that what I do and stuff like that. But oh my God, thank you so much. That clears up so many things. I'm like, wait, what happened? So yeah. So he's
honestly, I only realized some of it as I was explaining. I was like, oh, this is so smart. That's why you do book club. It's important.
Right, it's so like, that makes so much more sense. So yeah, but as American, we can totally say, or someone who's soon to be American, I can be like, oh, that's like silly talk. What do you mean I'm gonna save my money? I'm just buzzing to say, spend my tax refund. But yes, okay, all right, so that makes sense.
So then we wind up in this fight, which is like totally something right out of the movie. or the movie is doing it right out of the comic. They're at these, you know, historic waterfalls, and they're having this fight. It's like a duel. It's like, you know, Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. Like, they fight for like 30 minutes, and then one of them's like, I'm a little tired, I'm gonna go sit down. And then one of them's like, it's time for my heart-shaped herb break. And it's this very like regimented fight where they can only fight where they both consent, but the fight cannot end until one of them dies or yields. So like, again, Priest is playing with this. Part of it is like statescraft, and then part of it is quite deadly. And ultimately, Killmonger, at least briefly, wins. He knocks Panther unconscious before Panther can yield. And he's going to kill him, because if you don't yield, you can still be killed. And he forces Everett Ross to step in and say, with the power of the Sovereign, I'm going to yield the fight. Ross doesn't totally realize that he's yielded all the things that come with being T'Challa, not the money, because we just figured that out, not being king, because Ross is the king, but he did, unfortunately, yield being Black Panther to Ross. And so now Ross has taken on the Panther, which is not what he, or not Ross, Killmonger. And even though that's not what he originally wanted, he's like, well, hey, at least I can go be in the Avengers now. That's kind of his, like upshot, that he can work on destabilizing Wakanda through being a superhero and doing that same thing that T'Challa did in the 60s.
Right. And the thing is, I'm reading that, I'm like, oh, that's a very silver lining of you, like, you know, to kind of figure that out. But, you know, before the 2 pages that you showed, I am a huge sucker for, you know, what you call it, speechless fights.
Yeah.
So anytime I see that, my heart jumps a little bit. And there's like 2 glorious pages of that, just like boom, cap, and like, you know, all of that. And it's like, it always brings joy to me.
But the one great page that's all from T'Challa's point of view. So all you see is his, like, it's like if I walk behind the camera here and you're just seeing like this and him, and it's such a cool sequence.
Right. It starts like, you know, it's kind of comes from like, just as if like, look at it from this point of view and stuff like that. But however, like when Ross kind of yields on his behalf and stuff, the very next page, and this is where one of the Priest's genius, and it's all about how he killed his dog, like as a kid.
Because Ross is like total white trash is part of the several layered joke of Ross's existence, that he was like a total TV in the front yard white trash.
Right. And the thing is, like, it's kind of like, oh, it's literal TV in the frontier. Like, it's not like, you know, it's literal TV in the frontier. And the thing is, like, he has this dog who is like, you know, his K stands for Kenny, and his mother used to call him Kenny. And he was a very, like, you know, abused, like emotionally abused child. And he has this dog. And then his mom asked him to move the tractor. He gets in the tractor and starts it, and then kind of runs over his dog. And it was the saddest thing in the world, because, you know, the way it shows that is like the dog going beep, 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 and then all of a sudden, like nothing. Like, you know, it just goes beep, and then and you're like, oh no. So, but the thing is, like, it's kind of like, I feel like at that moment that was going through his mind, like, you idiot, now he don't get to be Black Panther anymore. So yeah, it was kind of like, I thought was like a very clever, like, these moments, I love them.
So that leads into an arc that personally as a fanboy, I was the most thrilled about. But as a critical reader here in the present day, I probably liked the least. And this is this Moon Knight arc. So I'm a massive Moon Knight fan. And he was another one of these 70s and early 80s characters who had been kind of set aside by Marvel and had only had 1 or 2 limited series and stopped appearing anywhere. And he basically shows up, and Priest is doing this, again, very interesting thing. It's like everything Priest does is interesting, where he's saying that Khonshu, who's an Egyptian god that created Moon Knight's powers, is effectively the same thing as the pantheon of African gods that Panther prays to and is connected through his Citadel of the Death, or whatever it's called.
Right.
And so if anybody can kind of lead him through the land of the dead to being healed after this Killmonger fight, it's probably Moon Knight. And I feel like Priest A is clearly a Moon Knight fan, and he does amazing things to rehabilitate this character. And there's so many great footnotes, and I'm like, wow, he cares. Like, him and the editor are really, really trying to advance Moon Knight's plot. Like, if I were to be mapping out the Moon Knight epic collections, I would probably put these issues in, because I think they're that
Okay.
important to Moon Knight. But
Right.
at the same time, it feels like he's trying to recapture the magic of like the whole silly thing with Mephisto at the beginning, because he has like Everett K. Ross dreaming about this world, and then he has Black Panther in the world, and Ross has to help him. But it's just like confusing, and I don't really understand really what happened with Nightmare, and if I should care what happened with Nightmare. And it just seems like a really big distraction to what was happening in the world. But it was a chance to write Black Panther as a superhero and do a superhero team up. So again, I feel like Priest did it with reason, but I think this is the first time that he really, for me, like falls off the tightrope in this run of very carefully balancing interesting things. I just think it kind of got uninteresting for me.
Well, so someone like, so seeing Moon Knight here was kind of like, I'm like, whoa, the world is telling me something, because I was actually like, I'm doing this thing where I'm going through and reading up, like defining runs of some of the lesser known characters in air code, but who are actually very interesting. And my next, I'm going to be reading Batwoman next. And then after that, it's Moon Knight that I was thinking about.
Should we do Batwoman in March for Women's History Month? Because I have every issue of Batwoman. I love her.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God, I love Batwoman so much. Okay.
Okay. So you're so excited about it. So yeah, to me, like,
you're gonna see, she's amazing. Moon Knight and Batwoman are two of my all-time favorite non-X-Men characters. So I'm like giddy. Yeah.
Oh my God. Okay. So so yeah, so it was kind of very interesting to kind of for me to see Moon Knight. My previous encounter with Moon Knight is kind of like Ultimate Spider-Man run. Whatever, it's kind of like Moon Knight appears in that too. And the thing is, I was kind of talking about it with my coworkers about this. I'm like, oh my God, like, because he read Priest's run before and he was telling me that, oh, how is it going? I'm like, oh my God, Moon Knight shows up. And he's like, yeah, Moon Knight is like if Batman was crazy.
Yes!
So,
if Batman actually was as crazy as Batman clearly is.
That's what I was saying. And I'm like, wait, are you telling me that Batman isn't crazy? But but the thing is, like, yeah, so apparently, so I'm really excited to kind of read Moon Knight's run. But at the same time, like, to me, it wasn't like, I don't know much about Moon Knight. So to me, I was like, oh, that's kind of like an interesting character. So, but one of the things
you have to think in 1999 or 2000 when this was being published, nobody knew about Moon Knight, because the last time his comic had been running was like in the early 90s, and that was the very tail end. So like most readers who were teenagers at this point had never had the chance to even read him.
Oh, okay. I think that's kind of like that brings up a different interesting point of view. Then it's like, I think like Priest was kind of bringing all this, like, lesser known or kind of discarded characters into the fold and kind of making them. But one of the interesting thing about it is that people often forget Egypt is in Africa. Like,
yeah,
so
and Priest is like really intent on reminding you. He's like, you might think of it as the Middle East, but it is on this continent.
It's not. Yeah. It's not. And so that's the thing that it's not surprising to think that, Wakandan culture, even though they were never colonized, is not going to be kind of taking all this influence from Egyptian mythology, which is like huge,
Right.
So yeah, I thought that was kind of the interesting part of it, because I'm like, Egypt. And honestly, I have a very like, geography, like wise, I have a lot, I've read up a lot and stuff. Even I forgot that Egypt is in Africa. Yeah. I forget that too. So yeah, it was kind of like a reminder and kind of like bringing that in.
So I want to show one fun panel here and then get to, I think, the final topic.
God. That was amazing.
I laughed so hard. So this is as Ross is like trying to catch up with Panther in this dream state. And at first you think this is Panther. Clearly it's Batman and Robin. And at first you think it's Panther's Panther's vision. But then you realize it's Ross thinking of himself as Panther's sidekick. And he kind of starts to realize that he does have a little bit of importance here. Like there's a reason that Panther has tolerated him and has confided in him and has made him king, and that like he's so caught up in the comedy of it and the being a secret agent of it that he's like forgetting to actually help Black Panther. And it kind of becomes the key to this Moon Knight story, but it also takes their arc as these two characters through the end of this run, where they finally start speaking to each other. Like we've seen Ross accompany T'Challa for 20 some issues now, and they hardly ever even exchange words. And I feel like this, even though it's funny and it's a Batman gag, it begins this period where they actually start interacting and speaking to each other a little bit, partially about the fact that they've shared a lover, Nikki, Ross's boss, who dies. stop.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is, like, there's actually, that was not the first Batman kind of like allegory that he brings in. This was the first one. This is where, you know, he has T'Challa all of a sudden gets a longer cape.
Yeah, and
as you can see. Yeah, and then, but in this one, he's actually Alfred. Everett is kind of thinking about his Alfred, and then he says that, oh, I feel like I should bring him a tea, because that's what seems like you do.
Right, because at the time he's like, that's how you would assist this hero. He's not thinking of himself as a character with agency. He's like, I'm the butler. I'm somebody who's assisting him. And it's so funny that Priest does all these little jabs that you would laugh at, but it's a huge part of the plot. Ross goes from seeing himself as a non-factor, a non-combatant Alfred who brings the bandages and the tea, to being Robin and being in the thick of it.
Yeah, but to me, I'm kind of like, you know, I feel like going Alfred to Robin is a demotion.
You think it's a downgrade?
It's a downgrade.
Depends on if you want to be in the action or not.
Right, yeah. That's correct. But, you know, this kind of brought me so... That's true. Like, you know, but this is kind of like brought joy to me. It's like in every movie, Act 2, Scene 4, diminutive servant brings brooding big cape guy a lovely beverage. Like, I was instantly thought about The Dark Knight, the movie. There was a scene like that. Act 2, Scene 4. It was exactly like that. And I was like, oh, this is pure joy.
Oh, so okay. This gets me to a tiny point before we wrap up, because we're at the hour mark here. Priest is he's a futurist. He's prescient. He really thinks of things that might happen. We have a plane that's going to crash into the White House written in 2000. We have in one panel, which I need to go back and find, because it blew my mind, he has Ross say that Black Panther's ready for anything. Civil War, alien invasion, which is 6-7 years before Civil War, the event, and Secret Invasion. And then he has Queen when she gets to Killmonger's city and she's traveling through it. And at first she's like, oh, she's like referring to it almost as like it's podunk. It's everything she expected from Africa. It's beneath her. It's provincial. And then she gets on the subway and she looks around and she says, it's this subway, this monorail running through the heart of a city, and I'm surrounded entirely by Black people, African people. And she has this like realization, and I feel like it's so similar to the cultural touchstone that we're having right now around the movie, where people are coming from the movie and they're like, it's a superhero movie. Yes, I get it. But I went to this movie and I saw a movie created by Black people, about Black people, and they're superheroes. And so I just think Priest is amazing at, it's not that he can see the future. It's that he's so tapped into like what's real and meaningful that he writes these scenes that are just going to keep resonating and keep reflecting what happens in reality, because he's an amazing writer. I think this run has cemented for me that I think he's one of the all-time great big two comic book writers. And you would be hard pressed to convince me otherwise at this point.
And say I completely agree with you. And to me, I was so shocked to find out that I didn't know about him before I got into the whole Black Panther fever thing, you know. And it's kind of like he took a self-exiled retirement, you know, and all of that. And I think he was kind of getting tired of being asked to do Black superheroes all the time. And one of the reasons, like, you know, when he came back to do Deathstroke, and one of the first thing he actually asked them, is he Black? And then when they say that, no, he's not, he's like, oh, okay, where do I sign up? And, you know, now him having to do, like, he can do Justice League and also the movie coming out and stuff. So I am really kind of interested to see all the other, you know, cool things he come up with. And kind of sad that he wasn't given the chance to do it. And, you know, kind of like, he said one thing, like, you know, to tell me that, oh, I was shunned because I'm Black is a lazy way of thinking about it, you know, because he himself is kind of known to be not very good to work with, and, you know, things like difficult to work with and all of that.
Right, like, you can just say I'm difficult. You don't have to make it, you know, as RuPaul frequently jokes, why has it got to be Black? Like, it's not, he can be difficult to work with for other reasons.
Yeah. And he himself says that. And I think to him, it was like, he figured, the time when he figured out that he's Black is like when he was constantly being asked to do Black superhero. That to him was like, okay, that's when I realized that I am actually Black. But he looks like, you know, he looks like he could be a Black Panther activist right next to Malcolm X. He still rocks that look. And, you know, so I'm kind of very excited to read on more from him as they kind of come out. So
yeah, and Priest, it brings up such an interesting point. And in this idea of own voices, right? There's a movement for inclusion and diversity on the page, which I love because I want to read comics that reflect the world. But then there's a movement of like, okay, well, it's one thing to have all these Black superheroes, but then the next step is like, are you hiring any Black people to write them? If you're going to have a Muslim superhero, do you have any Muslim writers? Not necessarily writing that superhero, but that could be interesting or authentic. And so I think that, you know, it's kind of like the stages of actually making real inclusion in comics. But part of it is that sometimes people just get stuck at that one stage. And for Priest, who we're saying over and over again is one of the greats, one of the all-time greats, you get Priest who's basically told, you're so good, we want you to write all of our Black characters. And it's like, Priest is so good that Priest should be writing Avengers, Justice League, you know, Batman, like that's how good Priest is. And at the same time, he's reading Deadpool. Part of it that we didn't talk about, and I don't think we need to spend time on, is there's a Deadpool crossover here from when Priest was writing Deadpool. And, you know, Priest created Quantum and Woody for Valiant, which is one Black character. But, you know, you have Priest who's stuck in this phase where Marvel is like, and all of the companies assume he wants to write a Black character since he's a Black author and he's so good. And I think that like you haven't reached like full inclusion until everybody's writing everything and everybody's doing everything. And like there's this recent Twitter move of like, wouldn't it be nice to see the X-Men written by somebody other than white guys? Like, can a woman write the X-Men franchise? But again, it's like, what's more likely, that a woman's going to write the X-Men franchise or that a woman's going to get like a Rogue book or like a X-Ladies team-up book? And I think that we haven't reached like true parity until everybody's writing everything. And Priest chief among them. I keep saying my response to that was Marvel should be sending Priest a Valentine's card tomorrow, thanking him for the Black Panther movie. And then they should back up a Brinks armored truck full of money to his house with a note on it that says, please write the X-Men. And it should just open and just dump money onto his front lawn because they need to steal him from DC right now.
Right. And the thing is, you know, that Marvel's not, you know, kind of, what do you call it? At this moment, Marvel Comics editors are not that smart. So obviously we're not going to see that. But the thing is, like, one of the things to note that though, this is becoming like a Priest appreciation video, but his name is actually not Christopher Priest.
Really? What is his name?
His name is something Owlsley. Like, and
I thought that was his pen name.
No, that's his real name. And he chose Christopher Priest. And the thing is, when he was an editor, he was so bad, so bad in the sense, like in terms of like difficult to work with, that the writers who were doing, I don't remember what it is, but they actually named a very bad villainous character as Owlsley. Like, you know, so it's not the same Owlsley that you see in Daredevil right now, but it's a different character that kind of they created. And then Jim Shooter, Jim Shooter, right? That's the
who was the editor of Marvel up through Secret Wars, yeah.
Right. So Jim Shooter actually had to bring him into the office and say that I need to fire you, and he's like, thank you. And then he went back and became a writer again. So he has a very interesting life. And then he was actually a Greyhound bus driver since 2005, between 2005 and 2009.
So after his comic book fame, right, it goes to show you, like, and we'll end on this note, people think comic book writers are like famous and, you know, we're all reading their books and talking about them and stuff. These are people who are contract employees with no health care and no benefits, and they're making a page rate, and they're probably making like what you made when you first graduated college, maybe. Right. Writing these comic books that 20 years later we're having a book club.
Exactly.
Like we should get $1 every time one of these comic books is read, and he's probably getting like 20 cents every time one of these whole collection is put out. So support your comic creators, buy their indie books, get on their Patreon, go and do whatever they're asking for. If they want $5 for a signature at the convention, freaking give them $5. Okay, they're writing your dreams.
Yeah.
On the page.
But just don't pay 100. I think $5 is fine. But no, I mean, there's some of them. It's like they ask for 100. I'm like, well, come on. But the thing is, like, and that's the thing. Like, after he finished his Black Panther run, he actually retired, like, you know, and drove a Greyhound bus.
Wow. Well, God bless DC Comics for bringing him back for Deathstroke.
Yeah,
and then probably the best comic that came out in 2017.
Yeah, and then he actually went on, because he's a very religious man, and he actually went to Colorado and did a lot of work around for churches and things like that, kind of helping them in terms of IT and things like that. And then all of a sudden, DC called him and told him that, hey, come write Deathstroke for us.
And he said, "Is he black?"
Yeah,
and DC said no.
Yes, that's exactly what it was. And I'm like, when I read that, I'm like, not a single word of that is lie. Like, if you read Black Panther the way he is, I'm like, that's exactly what I expected from writer of this book. So
well, that's where we're going to end, I think. I think that's the perfect punctuation. So look, if you've watched this live, thank you so much for sticking with us. If you've watched it in retrospect, thank you so much for tuning in and watching or listening. We are right now in the middle of this book, Black Panther Volume 2, The Complete Collection by Christopher Priest. Next week, we're going to finish it. So if you haven't picked it up yet, you could pick it up and just start with issue 25 and read it right to the end. This is also available on Marvel Unlimited. You can get it on Kindle. It's on Comixology. So read it any way that you're comfortable, but we'd love to talk to you about it next week, because after that, for the following week, we're going to jump to the brand new Ta-Nehisi Coates run of Black Panther. So exciting. And if you like this, please subscribe, comment, like, tell us that you want more book club, even if you don't necessarily want more Black Panther book club, because as you heard us say, we maybe could be doing Batwoman and Moon Knight in the next 2 months, which would make me wildly happy. But there's also the question of how I could even be doing some of my favorite comics in the world, like X-Men and Wildstorm, in a book clubby format. So definitely vote with your voice and your comments. Freya, any closing thoughts for our viewers and listeners here?
I am so excited for Thursday. It can't get here fast enough. 48 hours to go. I am so stoked for the movie. And I am kind of like very cautiously scared, like optimistic, and then kind of scared that I'm hyping myself too much. But you know what? Let a girl have it.
That's right.
All I say.
Well, next week, I think we're going to have like the no spoilers part of the episode. And then we're going to say spoilers. Because I think if we've both seen the movie by then, we're not going to be able to stop ourselves.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah. But until then, no spoilers. Enjoy your Black Panther. Love comic books. And thank you so much for watching from both me and Faria. And we'll see you next week. Same cat time, same cat channel for more Black Panther book club.
All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.